Good morning, everyone. This is Doug. This episode is going to be entitled, Did Constantine Fulfill Daniel 7 verses 24 to 25 by changing the time of Passover at Nicea, that's the 325 conference, and subduing three co-emperors in a tetrarchy? So you'll understand that when I read the verses from Daniel. Now let's look at Daniel 7 verse 24 on the left there. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. So I'm not going to discuss who the 10 horns are. I'm going to conjecture for now that they are 10 emperors that preceded the tetrarchy of Constantine, as we'll get into. So then he shall be diverse from the first. So this person is different from the people who came before, and he shall subdue 3 kings. Now, who's going to see that Constantine was in a tetrarchy, meaning a ruling empire ruled by 4 emperors simultaneously. We'll get into that in a minute. Verse 25, Daniel to the right. And he shall speak great words against the Most High. And you'll see why he does that. And shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and a times and the dividing of time. Now, speaking great words against the Most High, well, that would be clearly his consecration coin. Upon his death, he had prepared in advance a consecration coin to be basically his last will and testament, is the way he wanted to be remembered forever. He dies in 337 AD. That's about 24 years after, or 22 years after the Nicene Conference of 325. And what does this depict him as? It depicts him as not just a divine character, divinus, that'd be Latin divinus. No, he was divus, D-I-V-U-S, divus Constantine, God Constantine, and he depicts himself as Apollo god. That's the Greek version of the same thing that the Romans called Sol Invictus. And he depicts himself on a chariot heading off to the sun, back to his dwelling in the sun, which he's the god of the sun. So, and then he had Eusebius, and this is another thing that most people don't know about, but Eusebius was disgusted by Constantine in the end. After he died, his instructions were that he should be buried in the Church of the 12 Apostles, where Constantine asked Eusebius to collect over many decades the funeral boxes of all the 12 apostles, and they would all be there in a circle in this mausoleum type thing. And Constantine didn't tell Eusebius what his ultimate plan was. Well, guess what? When he dies, the instructions were that he was to be put in the middle of the 12 apostles so that they would worship him for eternity as the god of the sun, basically because of the consecration coin. So we know this guy ends up diabolical, okay? Plus, just to add fuel to your knowledge, is he brought back the Delphic Oracle from Delphi in Greece, brought it to Constantinople in 327, had the god, the Apollo religion reestablished in Constantinople with the Delphic Oracle still operating. And that, if that isn't the last straw for any Christian who says this guy is a Christian till the day he died, oh, no way. So anyway, he's an evil man. That's all you need to know about. And does he depict this or fulfill these passages here? And we're going to take a look at that. So looking at verse 24, it says, he shall be diverse from the first, these first type of emperors here, and he's going to be subduing 3 kings. Well, the way to subdue 3 kings is you can either be external or you can be part of a tetrarchy. So he was part of a tetrarchy. Tetra is a Greek word meaning 4 rulers, 4 archons. So he's a part of a tetrarchy, and they're each ruling parts of the Roman Empire, and they're supposedly supposed to be allies together. But then eventually Constantine conquers the other 3. Okay, and we'll see how that ended up. So there were 4 rulers. He ends up the sole ruler, and that's fulfilling here. And he who shall subdue 3 kings. He basically succeeds each one of them and becomes the sole emperor of the empire. And that happens just before Nicea 324. 1 year before, he's consolidated all the power under himself. He's fulfilled Daniel 7:24. Now, will he wear out the saints of the Most High and think to change the times and the laws? We're going to see he's going to try to change, and he did change the time of Passover to be a different date than was in the Torah. That would be Nisan 14, the 14th day of Nisan. That is determined by a lunar cycle, and then he's going to pick a different cycle, which is controlled by the sun, which of course he's the god of the sun himself. That's what he kept secret from everybody until he died, and you could see his coin. And so he thinks he's God of the sun. So he's not telling you why he's doing what he's doing, but you're going to change Passover to be correlated to the sun. And what do I mean by that? That'd be the spring equinox, when the time of sunlight in a day would be equal for between daylight and nighttime. So that's what he's going to do. He's going to change the day of Passover to have nothing to do with the moon, but have only something to do with the sun. Just again, keep this all in mind. He's an evil man beyond belief, and we'll go into it in more depth. I'll show you more. All right, I'm going to just mention briefly right at the moment that Constantine at Nicea in 325 AD caused the time of Passover to no longer be Nisan 14 and instead changed it to the next day of the sun, the god of the sun. Remember that? He created this day of the sun in 321 AD. So this god of the sun day is when you're going to now worship or have your time of reflecting upon Jesus at a Passover, where Jesus said, "Remember me, do this in remembrance of me." We talked about Luke 22, verse 19 about that. But again, he's not telling anyone, my real God is God, the sun in the sky, who I think I am that person. And we'll get more into that in a bit. Now, so he changes it so that the day that you would observe Passover, that time you'd reflect upon Jesus' work on the cross, would be the Sunday after the spring equinox. Okay. Now, this fits the Antichrist figure of Daniel 7:25. But we're going to postpone going into that in depth just so that we handle the first issue first, which is 724. Constantine is an uncanny fulfillment of that, replacing or removing or subduing three rulers, leaving himself the sole ruler in a tetrarchy, which exactly happens in the time of Constantine. By the way, AI was very helpful here, and I want to show you how it works, why it can help you research anything you want to see if there's a biblical fulfillment. Did Constantine have to subdue three political foes to become sole emperor? And one of the AI responses was, the road to becoming sole emperor involved navigating the complex political landscape of the tetrarchy, which is the words there. It's a good thing if you study Greek, you'd know what that was. Tetra means four. He was in a tetrarchy. He was in a ruling power of four emperors. And that's how I knew this was going to be a lucky, not maybe lucky, but maybe a God thing that he showed me this and tested against Constantine. So he is going to win out amongst four emperors that are co-ruling. He'll be the only one left standing, as we'll see. Now, let me talk about some of the people involved in this. Now, who was Constantine? Constantine was born in Naissus, a city located in the province of Moesia Superior. Constantine was the son of Flavius Constantius, a Roman army officer, who would become one of the four emperors of the Tetrarchy. So Constantine is going to go on to become one of the four emperors. That means he has three others he has to defeat, right? What does the Bible talk about? He has to subdue three kings. So that's his challenge. Can he do that? And will he fulfill prophecy by doing that? So I just wanted to show you tetra is how you would pick this up. If you know Greek, you'd go, okay, then that means four. So he's in a ruling authority power of four. And again, you can look up the word tetrarch and you'd see it again here. There are four divisions of power in the country of the Roman Empire under Constantine and the other three. Now, Constantine did not initially become part of the Tetrarchy. His father, Constantius, was one of the four original rulers. So he wasn't originally there, but when his dad dies, he takes his place. So that's another thing to consider. This Tetrarchy was established by one of the emperors in 293 AD. While Constantine was likely the heir presumptive of Constantius's position, he didn't become a formal ruler until after his father's death and was acclaimed by the army of the Eboracum in 306 AD. So he doesn't become part of the Tetrarchy until 306 AD. By the time of 324, he's going to have wiped out the other three guys or eliminated them. Constantine ultimately eliminated the other rulers of the Tetrarchy through a series of civil wars, ultimately becoming the sole ruler of the Roman Empire by 324. He first defeated Maximus at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312, securing control of the Western Roman Empire. Later, he defeated Licinius in 324, ending the Tetrarchic system and becoming the sole Augustus. Okay, so how do we account for the last of the three that he has to eliminate? That's Maximus Dax, or Dax. He's also known as Daza. And he was a Roman emperor during the Tetrarchy, the rule of the four. And he likely died, they think, of severe thyrotoxicus. And this is kind of speculation, honestly. But what happened is he loses a big battle in this conflict with the Tetrarchy itself. He fled to Tarsus after defeating battle and died a few months later. And again, speculation that he died of some sort of thyrotoxicosis. With the death of Maximus Dax and the defeat of Licinius, the Tetrarchic system ended with Constantine as the sole Augustus. So all three are gone. By the way, was there any concern that he died by poisoning? Well, that's also possible. While some accounts attribute his death to despair, poison, or divine punishment, the symptoms and statute evidence suggest the death related to the severity of his thyrotoxicus. But by the way, poison could actually create the thyrotoxicus, I would say. So that's another possibility. Now, just to back up a little bit, to give a little more detail about Maximinus Daza, this fourth guy, the third of three that he has to eliminate to take over, is basically in conflict with all the other guys in the four tetrarchs. So they're all fighting against each other. Let's just read a little bit about this so you can understand that definitely they're not friends, and therefore there's a war going on between them. In 308, after the elevation of Licinius, that's one of the co-emperors, to Augustus, that's a title of honor, Maximinus, one of the other tetrarchs, and Constantine, the first, were declared brothers of August, or sons of Augusti. But Maximinus probably started styling himself as Augustus, again, trying to take this title of high honor, with support of his troops during a campaign against the Sassanids in 310. On the death of Galerius in 311, Maximinus, that's the guy we're trying to track here, divided the Eastern Empire between Licinius, that's one of the other co-emperors in the Tetrarchy, and himself. So he's trying to peel off Licinius towards himself. That's what Maximinus was trying to do to defend himself from Constantine. When Licinius and Constantine began to make common cause, and now Constantine fights back and peels off Licinius from helping Maximinus, Maximinus entered into a secret alliance with the usurper Maxentius. So then he goes to the other of the fourth. The fourth tetrarch was Maxentius, who controlled Italy. He came to an open rupture with Licinius in 313. He summoned an army of 70,000 men, but sustained a crushing defeat at the Battle of Tizelarum in the neighborhood of Heraclea, Parentis. On 30th of April, he fled first to Nicomedia and afterwards to Tarsus, Paul's hometown, by the way, where he died the following August. So, again, and reports included that he was poisoned. So, Constantine is not below the belt when it comes to how you beat somebody. So, anyway, there's your proof positive that here's a tetrarchy of four rulers and one wins, and it's Constantine. So, one way or the other, Constantine subdued the other three. He won over them. So I just want to wrap up verse 24 before we go to 25. So what we're saying is 24 in this half of the second half of verse 24, where it's talking about this person, he shall subdue three kings. That person fits Constantine at this point. Okay, so we're going to keep going, and you'll see how he really goes and fulfills verse 25 very clearly. So that helps attach these prophecies to him. So let's take a look. Constantine at Nicea in 325 AD caused the time of Passover to no longer be Nisan 14. Remember, the next verse 25 is going to be about changing the times and the season, and we'll get into what that means. Times means the holidays. And instead changed Passover to be the next day of the sun. That's Constantine's true God. He really believes he's the God of the sun. That's what we know from his death instructions and his consecration coin. Change it to be the next day of the sun, the next Sunday after the spring equinox. That and this fits the Antichrist figure. It's a type of Antichrist that you see in Daniel 7:25. Okay, so let's read Daniel 7 verse 25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until time and at times and the dividing of time. So let's ask, God in Daniel warns of a future evil figure or figures who will seek to change the times, the holy days. Does it mean holy days? Yes, Daniel 7:25, which mentions times, likely refers to changing or altering the set times and festivals, which are often associated with the Sabbath and other holy days in the Bible. Okay, so that's important. Some scholars interpret this passage as referring to the times appointed for festivals and religious observances, precisely, because that's what he's doing, Constantine will do to Passover. Let's continue and see why the word times has this meaning. Times in Daniel 7, verses 25. The Hebrew word zaman, translated as times, can refer to specific periods or appointed times, particularly in relation to religious observance. Again, holidays. So now let's see if Constantine had any meddling with the day of Passover and went to observe it. Constantine's decree is that the date for Passover must not be in common with the Jews. That's his decree. Caused a new date for Passover to, and I say, to be changed in 325 AD. Let's read what the AI answer to this question is. Yes, the First Council of Nicea in 325 did change the date that Christians celebrate Passover, or Pascha, as it's called in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. The council aimed to establish a common date for, not Easter, because that doesn't, nobody's talking about Easter in England or Ostar in Germany. It's the common date for Passover, the Christian celebration of Jesus' resurrection, and decided it should be on the first Sunday after the first full moon following the vernal equinox. Okay, so the first Sunday after the spring equinox. Okay, so there's a sun-centered date. It may sound like the moon's involved here, but the key here is the equinox is the an effect the sun has where it's equally daylight and equally night in a single day, called the spring equinox, and that'll happen in the winter as well. But because the Earth is rotated to a different position, exactly opposite in the orbit it's in. This date was to be observed regardless of the Jewish Passover date. So in other words, we no longer have anything in common with the Jews, which is what Constantine decreed. This is his words. Nothing in common with the Jews. Now, I want to tell you this was not a free decision of the people there. Oftentimes you'll hear they say, well, the decrees of Nicaea said this and said that. Well, these were not done voluntarily. Constantine's decrees, if one refused to vote in favor, would cause exile, which is a certain death in due course. So his exile decree was that if you didn't go along with what he said, you would be exiled to the northern part of England, which is where the most vicious and deadly Goths is, I think, the right word for it. These people who were uncontrollable by the Romans, they couldn't even control. And so to send you to your death, you just put you out there and they'll eventually get you. So the answer is, I asked this question then of AI, and it says, yes, Constantine the Great did require the adoption of the decrees of the Council of Nicaea in 325, and he enforced them with the threat of exile for those who dissented. He even personally presided over the council and delivered a speech as chairman, making it clear he would actively intervene in church affairs. Constantine used his political power to resolve the disputes and established a unified, and it says Christian faith. No, a faith that was contaminated by sun worship, including the change in Passover and also the deification of somebody who's not God and claimed the Father is the only true God. And yes, that's Jesus in John 17, verses 1 to 3. The Father is the only true God, but not at Nicaea, not when you have somebody who wants himself to be deemed another Christ-like figure who could be God, a second being who can be God. That's what he's trying to change Christians' mind, to have a more pagan mindset that you can have another God in a council of gods, in a Godhead type situation. And that's what he's up to. All right, we'll get into this in even more depth in a moment, but I just want to show you what some of the key points are for us as Christians today. Step one, Passover is a name English speakers must use to replace the pagan Easter and Ostar. So in other words, Nicaea was all about Passover, how it got twisted, so it became about Easter, a pagan goddess, and how it got twisted to be Ostara, a pagan goddess in German-speaking lands, is whatever it is wrong. It wasn't even decreed at Nicaea, so you can't claim any protection. So this is a pagan direction that the people of England were spiritually weak. Obviously, also the people in Germany were very spiritually weak, and they wanted to have pagan goddesses worshipped in the same time period they're worshiping or paying homage to Jesus' work on the cross. So that's completely a very weak culture, and we call that syncretism, where you line up your pagan religion to be in sync with your Christian religion, and ultimately you don't have any integrity to your Christian religion at all. You have all these myths and bunny rabbits and all the things that will come with it in due course. Step two, Christians of all denominations must restore Passover date to Nisan 14. So that's what this episode is about. We have to undo the crime of Constantine against the church's calendar. We had to keep Nisan 14. Now, let me just tell you this. I want to go tell you again why Constantine is so obviously corrupt and evil. Look at the question of whether he ever told anyone he was a Christian before he wanted to do the Nicene Creed and set that up in 324. Did he really tell anybody? Because if he didn't, and it was the most amazing thing, he saw this sign in the sky, and he later tells everybody, "Oh my gosh, it was so fantastic! I had all the men change their shields and all this kind of stuff." Well, he's a big fat liar. I can prove it. Here's what really happened. Constantine keeps secret from 312 AD, which is the Battle of Milvian Bridge, where this alleged event occurs, where Jesus appears to him on a cross, and then the sign of the in the sky was the Cairo allegedly, and then in that symbol, the men will win. They could just change all their uniforms to put on this vest that has the Cairo on it, and supposedly that's going to bring victory. Okay, all made up stuff way after the fact. This guy is a myth maker. Okay, definitely. From 312 to 324, he makes not a single public mention of seeing Jesus at the Milvian Bridge in advance. Now, what's most important of all, there's a Arch of Constantine. Anybody can see to this day at Rome, and you will see Simca went there and did videos and did a whole episode on this for his archaeology series, and it shows not a single Christian emblem, a Christian symbol, a Cairo, or anything like that, and it shows Jupiter and Venus and all these other gods getting credit for having led the victory. Now, so I asked AI, well, is there any evidence of on that arch of anything that Constantine thanked Christ for? Here's what the answer is. The Battle of Milvian Bridge, where Constantine claimed to have seen Christ's sign in the sky before the battle, took place in 312 AD. Specifically, it was fought on October 28th, 312. But no, the Arch of Constantine does not feature overt Christian symbols. While it commemorates Constantine's victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, which is often associated with his conversion to Christianity, a bogus conversion, obviously, now we can see, the Arch of Constantine, primarily uses imagery from Christian Roman tradition. No, pagan Roman traditions and earlier emperors to legitimize Constantine's rule. So nothing could be more clear that he was a fraud and he lied to us. And you're everybody who's gone along with this charade that he put on is done it because they want to go along with the doctrines that he promulgated and believe in them. That's the only reason you can ever suppose that we are not being told the truth about him, because we're not. We're being left in the dark about him. Now, I'm going to tell you of an event that occurred 3 years after his alleged appearance of seeing Jesus in the anticipation of the Milvian Bridge battle. He sees Jesus in the sky, supposedly, or an emblem of Jesus. And you would think his heart would be changed. He'd be, nice guy, maybe. No. Listen to this evil man. The evil mind of Constantine revealed 3 years after Jesus supposedly appeared to him. Constantine, when he gave the Edict of Toleration to Christians in 315 AD to the Christians, he, however, ordered severe punishment for anyone who joined the sect of the Jews. He's not giving freedom of religion. He's not just tolerating Jews. He's banning anybody joining them without being punished, becoming a Jew or joining Judaism. Let's listen to this. The Laws of Constantine the Great, October 18, 315. Okay, that's 3 years after the Milvian Bridge. It's called Concerning Jews, Heaven Worshippers, and Samaritans. That's the decree. The law is called. He says this, Constantine, we wish to make it known to the Jews and their elders and their patriarchs that if, after the enactment of this law, any one of them dares to attack another who has fled their dangerous sect, meaning a Jew that's left Judaism, and attached himself to the worship of God, meaning Christianity, he must speedily be given to the flames and burned. So anybody who leads a Christian to join the sect of Judaism, which there's nothing incompatible with Judaism, should there be, if they were still following Christ, even within Judaism? So what is he doing? Together with all his accomplices. Moreover, if any one of the population should join their abominable sect, meaning Jews, and attend their meetings, he will bear with them the deserved penalties. There is no freedom of religion with this man. There's no toleration for anybody who's part of the tribe of the Jews. And remember, Abraham's family would be a blessing on all mankind. This man is persecuting them to the nth degree. Not only is he anti-Semitic, you could say he's just viciously evil. I mean, this is not any kind of fairness at all. So now let's start putting this all together. There's an Antichrist-like figure, not called Antichrist, obviously, in Daniel 7:25. Let's read it again. And he shall speak great words against the Most High. And I believe insulting the Jewish people and their role in history to be a benefit to all mankind. is pretty evil here. Just for them having anyone join from a Christian organization, they want to fellowship with a Jewish person, they're going to be killed. They're going to be put in the flames for that. And if anyone even converts to them, is going to be punished with civil punishments. This is evil beyond belief, right? He shall wear out the saints of the Most High. And we're going to get into that now. What does Constantine do with the people who won't go along with Passover being changed from Nisan 14 to a totally different date, the Sunday after the spring equinox, okay? And thinks to change times, that's holidays, I showed you that earlier, and the laws, which the law of Sabbath and uh, the law of Sabbath is another thing. He makes people work on Sabbath, and you can only rest on Sunday, the day of the sun, the God of the sun in the sky. That's the only day. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and the times and the dividing of time. So it definitely fits all the characteristics of this character here. Constantine's role in issuing laws punishing quattordecimans, people who believed you've observed the 14th day. Quattordeciman means 14. So the believers in Nisan 14, the day that Passover is supposed to be observed, is called, and any of those people who want to do that, they're called 14ers, just like you call the 49ers people who wanted to collect gold out of the rivers near the Salinas Valley area. So but this time they are trying to just observe Passover at the right date, is a biblical date. So he's going to punish them very severely, even though it obeys Jesus' Passover-related command. His own words were, as decreed, in the first place, it was decreed unworthy to observe that most sacred festival in accordance with the practice of the Jews. So this is Constantine telling you what was decreed in Nicea, but it was his decree. Okay, he's making everyone go along with him, being this very anti-Semitic view. So in the first place, it was decreed in Nicea, Constantine is writing, unworthy to observe that most sacred festival in accordance with the practice of the Jews. So it's unworthy of you to actually keep the 14th Nisan because it's the practice of the Jews. That's what he's trying to say. They're so evil, having sullied their own hands with a heinous crime. Well, I mean, he's forgetting, and he obviously didn't read Acts chapter 3, is the 5,000 Jews who were involved in exhorting Pilate to kill Jesus repented, and Peter imparted forgiveness to them, and they were basically all baptized. So what is he doing? It's a heinous crime that's been long ago forgiven because they repented. Such blood-stained are as one might expect the mentally blind. Well, you're really spiritually blind, Constantine. Constantine wore out the saints who resisted the date change. So now let's talk about the people who want to hold on to 14 Nisan, hold on to the word of God, right? What's going to happen to them? They'll be worn out because they're going to be persecuted to the nth degree. Constantine approved the law that Passover was moved to Sunday after spring equinox, as per his coerced demand in Nicea, that Christians have nothing in common with the Jews. All right, so let's take a look at an AI answer about the quattordecimans, the 14ers, the people who wanted to keep Nisan 14. Constantine the Great played a significant role in the quartordeciman controversy by supporting the Council of Nicaea's decision, that was his decision, to have Christians celebrate Easter on a Sunday. Now, again, Easter isn't even present at Nicea. The word is Passover, is all they're talking about, on a Sunday, and by actively persecuting those who refuse to comply. And then there's a citation to this source. Now I'm going to show you a couple of other things. So I decided to go to that source, Grace Communion International, Grace Communion International. It says this: after the council's close, Emperor Constantine supported its judgment with a vile anti-Semitic attack against the Quartordecimans. He ordered a severe persecution of those who refuse to comply. So again, what does the verse say here? Shall wear out the saints. I would say having a severe persecution of those who refuse to comply with obeying the 14th Nisan is Passover are definitely people who are being persecuted for following God's word. Now, I want to now go back over a little bit of history about how the timing was changed from 14 Nisan of when to celebrate Passover. Why does Passover in the Catholic, Orthodox, and Evangelical Protestant communities no longer coincide with the Jewish day of observance of Passover? Why, in particular, is this true even if they retain the name Passover as the festival season they celebrate? So all of Europe uses Passover, different variants of it, but it's always Pasqua or similar words, even in French, Spanish, whatever. Only the British, the English speakers, and the Germans use the goddess Istre or the goddess Ostara. They're the same goddess, but they're pronounced differently. Continuing. At the Council of Nicea in 325, Passover's day of celebration was changed at the urging of the Emperor of Rome, meaning Constantine. He specifically demanded it to be a different day other than 14 Nisan at twilight so as to spite the Jews. Emperor Constantine's ostensible reasons were all blatantly grounded in a virulent anti-Semitical tirade. I read you some of that already. Constantine would not tolerate those who wanted to retain the apostolic practice of keeping Passover on 14 Nisan at twilight. These were known as quattordecimans, i.e. fourteeners in Latin, like we call the gold rush enthusiasts the 49ers. These adherents were called the fourteeners. Because Constantine was able to heavily influence doctrine, the Roman Catholic Church now inflicted excommunication on all quattordecimans. This resulted in all kinds of civil penalties. For example, they couldn't inherit any property from their family. This is how the true apostolic practice of observing 14 Nisan as the true day for Passover was wiped out in Roman territories. Yet the name Passover continued to be used. So that's very important to understand. The word Easter and Ostar and all that in Germany, that's centuries away. I mean, it's not even an issue because there's no Easter known to any of the people there. This is a Roman Empire. This is not the British Empire. This is not the German Empire. They're not even part of the Roman Empire. The parts we're talking about are not part of the Roman Empire, or at least don't influence any of the religion of the Roman Empire. So that's way into the future. Okay, so this is not what is really happening here. Is it's all a discussion only about Passover. Yet the name Passover continued to be used. This is why the feast is still called Passover in all of Christendom, except in English-speaking and German lands. But again, that happened many years later. Thus, it was the British and Germans who solely refused to observe Passover under any name other than that of their goddess known as Estre in Britain and Ostar in Germany. She would have a priority over Passover. The Catholic Church tolerated this in Britain and Germany. Now, these are hundreds of years after Nicea, okay? So that's important. This was simply inherited by the Protestant English and German Church, meaning of our era, without any re-examination. Luther translated the Passover lamb as Osterlamm in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 7. As a result, Protestants in English-speaking and German-speaking lands came to completely forget the very context in which the drama of the resurrection was to be recreated each year. It was the Passover week, which starts with the Passover dinner and continues in what is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. All right. Now I'm going to read a little bit of an article that I think is persuasive for us as Christians, independent of whether Constantine is good or evil or he's this Antichrist-like figure in Daniel 7, verse 25. We need to reevaluate whether we should be using any more of this word Easter. And I've covered that in the prior episode, but it's now, I think you can see it's coming to the fore that Constantine is an evil person and he's deliberately destroying the true festival of Passover and making it something sun-centered based on an equinox that involves the sun and nothing to do with the original meaning or timing of Passover. Let's hear what the person who wrote this article, Father Michael Harper, an Orthodox father. That's what the Orthodox do. They call themselves fathers. Again, following the Roman Catholic practice. Most people don't know this. The Orthodox split, I think it was 1024 AD, from the Catholic Church because the Roman Catholic Church because of it's called the Filioque dispute, and I'm not going to get into it. But anyway, let's read what he has to say. This background now allows you to understand why the Orthodox Church in English countries cannot fathom the practice of calling this feast Easter. As Michael Harper, an Orthodox leader, notes, quote, this is a much more important subject than a mere dispute about words, end of quote. Harper acknowledges that virtually no one realizes the original pagan goddess worshipped in April was named Easter. Yet it is the very meaninglessness of the name Easter which effectuated a loss of the real meaning of the season. This is how we lost the content of what we were trying to do, amend the Passover service to remember Jesus while we simultaneously remembered all the other works of God which were part of the Passover dinner. We don't do that at all, which we're supposed to. That's what Jesus was intending. Okay, he was amending, adding, not taking away, not eliminating. Harper explains the Orthodox Church's viewpoint on this phenomenon among English speakers. He says this: there is a constant temptation to drop the word Pascha and, for clarity and sometimes charity, use the Western word Easter. But perhaps the time has come for us to make a stand against this. In our increasingly secular and pagan society, the use of a pagan word of which no one knows the meaning is hardly suitable to describe the greatest day in the Christian year. When most people knew the Christian meaning of the word Easter as Passover, one couldn't perhaps make out a case for using the word, but not today. So he ends concluding, we should encourage the West to unite with us in using the right word, which is Pascha. Well, technically, it's Passover for us in English. Maybe in a Greek-speaking church, which Greek Orthodox is what he belongs to. Well, yeah, you would say Pascha because that's Greek. But we speak English, so we would say Passover. So that's the way to resolve this problem. In other words, if we did retain, this is Doug talking here. In other words, if we did retain the substance of Passover practice within our Easter observance, perhaps you could say using Easter as a name is harmless. But now the word Easter obscures rather than highlights what we are trying to celebrate to honor Jesus' commands to revise the Passover ceremony. Yeah. So by not having kept the word Passover, we didn't know what we're doing. We have no concept of what we're doing. And that's why you can't forget that all the rest of Europe uses the word Passover in the various forms, Pascha and Pasqua, all this in just Italian, Spanish. I showed this in the prior episode. So we need to get back to that, and we need to then observe it. Now follow it. Get rid of the word Easter, Ostara. I want to quickly point out that God abhors in this passage of 1 Kings 12:33 someone moving a date that's biblical to a different date, and God ridicules it as devising in his own heart a date. King Jeroboam moved the Feast of Tabernacles 1 month, and God ridicules it as being devised in his own heart. Spanish Reina Valera translates it as he invented in his heart this change in the month. The Hebrew word is actually bada, which means to invent. So this King Jeroboam changed the date of the Feast of Tabernacles by 1 month, and that this is the way he's being ridiculed. Kyle and Deish explained this was a, quote, arbitrary alteration of the law. So that's another thing about getting back to Daniel 7:25. It's changing the times and the law. So when you change a date that the festival is supposed to be observed, you've not only changed the time, you've also changed the law. So keep that in mind. So when this happened in First Kings, moving the date by 1 month by King Jeroboam to a later month, the Feast of Tabernacles, right? Feast of Tabernacles. By doing that, it was an arbitrary alteration of the law. And then they explained Jeroboam also transferred it to the 8th month, the feast which ought to have been kept in the 7th month, the Feast of Tabernacles, which is, according to Leviticus 23:34, the prior month. So you see, God doesn't appreciate people changing the times and the law, which is by the simultaneous act of changing the day to observe a holiday. All right, so I've kind of saved the best for last, where Constantine actually tells you why he wants the day of Passover changed and eliminated, okay? Emperor Constantine at the Council of Nicea in 325 stated the ostensible rationale for the change. He thought it was imperative Passover not be held on the same day as Jews keep Passover. Constantine stated victoriously at the council, quote, it was in the first place declared improper to follow the custom of the Jews in the celebration of this holy festival, Passover. Let us then have nothing in common with the Jews, who are our adversaries, avoiding all contact with that evil way. Therefore, this irregularity must be corrected in order that we may no more have anything in common with those parricides and the murderers of our Lord, no single point in common with the perjury of the Jews. That's in Theodoret's Ecclesiastical History. He's a contemporary of that era, 400s, as I recollect. Anyway, the point is that this is a panegyric of hate and venom. This is not a Christian. This is a man filled with evil. And again, taking no sensitivity to the fact in book of Acts chapter 3, the Jews had already been absolved, according to Apostle Peter, of this crime because they came as a collective group apologizing, saying we're sorry, and those people who actually participated. So what's the point of berating them and now calling them parricides? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And but more importantly, you can see it's very political here. He wants to exterminate Jews for some reason because they believe in the true God of Israel. I think that's a very important fact, whether we like it or not. That's still believing in the true God of Israel. They may have been given a false Jesus that they don't want to accept, and maybe even this Jesus that's happening here in Nicea is going to be a different Jesus than Jesus would have even accepted, and he would reject himself if he could be given a seat at the table in Nicaea. What do you think he's going to say? He said the Father's the only true God, so how can he accept what happens at Nicaea, that there's a God the Son, there's a God the Holy Spirit, as if there's three, no, not a God the Holy Spirit, there's a God the Son, and there's a God the Father. Where does that come from? That's not that's a contrary to Jesus' words in John 17:1-3. So I think this is just shows you where the heart of this man is, and he's changing the times of the laws. He's violating everything conceivable about this. Now let's watch there's evidence contemporary with this of what really was the original church view of Passover. Of this date, the 14th of Nisan, there can be no doubt. Polycarp, who was martyred in 155, spoke of Christians keeping Passover at 14 Nisan. So way back then. The dispute then was, should we observe it on the Friday between the evens, or should we observe it on Sunday? Okay, because Jesus resurrects on a Sunday, but he dies on a Friday night between the evens, between the Saturday morning and the evens. So what do you do Saturday night? Shabbat night is at sunset. So does that mean we observe the Friday night Passover, which is what he actually was talking about, doing it on the same day where you're doing the remembrances, or should we remember them on Sunday, which is not part of the remembrance package of Passover? So the majority position, the apostolic decision of Apostle John, was it should be on the 14th, on the Friday, Saturday even period where you're at sunset. So let's read. This is what Polycarp claims. Spoke of Christians. Okay. Uh, Polycarp claimed he learned from Apostle John, whom he claimed to know as a child, and other apostles, the fact it would be 14 Nisan. Eusebius records that Polycarp went to Rome to convince the Bishop of Rome to change back to apostolic practice. So the practice they were doing was simple. It wasn't the vernal equinox or nothing like that. It was just simply, instead of observing Passover on 14 Nisan, you'd go a couple of days later, like 16 Nisan, whatever that date would be, that would coincide with the first day of the week. And that was what they thought, some Bishop of Rome had thought was a better approach, but that's not what Apostle John agreed to. No, he said it should be between the evens on the 14th, between the 14th and 15th. Eusebius says that Bishop of Rome could, quote, not persuade Polycarp not to observe what he had always observed with John, the disciple of our Lord, and the other apostles with whom he associated. That's Eusebius' Ecclesiastical History, chapter 23. So you can tell Eusebius is himself sympathetic to Polycarp, okay, at that time. Likewise, Passover for Christians on 14 Nisan was recorded in the Apostolic Constitution, which dates somewhere between 220 AD and the late 300s. So there's really no doubt when we were supposed to do it and what was the practice going on long before Constantine. Now, I want to read you from a work by Epiphanius writing in the late 300s, because he concedes a lot of what we're saying here, although he at the same time ridicules anyone who wants to keep 14 Nisan. So let's read what he says. For they, meaning the 14ers, choose to celebrate the Passover with the Jews. Okay, with the Jews or not with the Jews, they're going to keep the Passover when God's law says. So he doesn't tell you that. That is, they contentiously celebrate the Passover. In other words, they're doing this to raise problems. No, they're just obeying God. So Epiphanius proves to me he's an apostate himself. He doesn't want to follow God's word. He wants to follow what man's traditions make up. They contentiously celebrate the Passover at the same time that the Jews are holding their festival on unleavened bread. Well, the unleavened bread overlaps on Passover a little bit there, so you're supposed to have unleavened bread at Passover. And indeed, it is true that this used to be the church's custom. See, so that's what I wanted to use this quote for. He's admitting that the church used to follow the custom, that the church under the apostles used to follow the custom of 14 Nisan, even though they tell churchmen a slanderous thing in that regard and say, you abandon the fathers, the Paschal rite in Constantine's times, from the deference to the emperor. So now he's trying to juxtapose the fact that it was correctly being, it was indeed followed 14 Nisan in the early church, but these people are bad people because they try to slander them by saying you abandoned the fathers' Passover rite, Paschal rite in Constantine's time from deference to the emperor. Well, not only they didn't do it from deference, they were forced. Epiphanius, don't you know your history? Probably didn't know the history. 9.5. And if the Passover were celebrated on the same day each year, now this is what they were trying to say. There's an impracticality. If you follow a lunar calendar, it's not a problem. But if you are following a different calendar, sun-based calendar, which is the Roman calendar, it won't be the same date. It won't always be the same number. So, but in Judaism, it's always the same number. It's 14 Nisan. That's it, because they measure it from a certain lunar appearance of the moon, and that starts the month. Okay, so they never have a problem. But the Romans can't work with that. They want to have regularity, but they can't. If you do this, you can't always have it at the same time. And if the Passover were celebrated on the same day each year, and it had been decided to keep it on the day of the council convoked by Constantine, what they said might be plausible. But since the rite cannot fall on the same day each year, their argument is worthless. So in other words, he says, I almost would go along with you, but you know what? We can't make, with your system of using a 14 Nisan, that doesn't always fall on the same date on our calendar in the pagan world of Constantine. So we have to get rid of your date in 14 Nisan so we can keep to a similar date all the time, every year, the same date in pagan world. So you see, that's what he's trying to argue, is why you should just disregard God's word. Okay, that Epiphanius proves to me he's a complete apostate. So why are we even adhering to anything he has to say? But here's where it gets really funny. In fact, God accomplished two highly important things through Constantine: the most beloved of God and forever the most blessed. This is the guy who's persecuting Jews and is giving them death penalties, or they recruit anyone. Or I mean, this is just insane. And he's an apostate himself. He's an evil person, and he's a murderer, and he murdered people, and he lied about being a Christian all those years. It was a fraud. He obviously didn't do anything, see anything on the road near the Maxentius Bridge, and nothing happened with his troops because there's nothing on that arch of Constantine in Rome. And he had all the time to do that, to give a record of it, and even give a testimony. He did nothing to say that message about his experience. He didn't tell anybody until 324. Okay, a year before the call, when he wins the Tetrarchy, he defeats the other three. That's when he tells them, 324, and now he wants to bring them to Nicea, where they're going to get told what to do, and if they don't do it, they're going to be exiled. What kind of leader is this guy? He's a terrible, evil man. There's no doubt about it. But let's keep listening. The most beloved of God and forever the most blessed. One was the gathering, this is the achievement of him, of the ecumenical council, and the publication of the creed that was issued at Nicea and confessed by the assembled bishops and with their signatures. Well, wait a minute. Did you not know, everybody, that the Bishop of Rome never signed it? Never. Sylvester couldn't go because it was deliberately, many people suspect, set in Nicea, so he couldn't go. He was the most influential person, and he couldn't make it. And that was because Sylvester's knees were very bad, and he couldn't walk, and he couldn't travel. So that's why he couldn't go at all to Nicea. So he didn't ever sign. The most important bishop of the empire would have been the Bishop of Rome, and he doesn't sign. That even the Catholic Church admits that. This deposition of Arius, that was another wonderful achievement. Let's get rid of this guy who's claiming that Jesus was a firstborn of creation, and therefore he couldn't be a divine being from eternity. And guess who said Jesus was the prototokos of creation? Oh, Paul. So even Paul doesn't get past Constantine's deliberate desire that Jesus has to be an eternal being no matter what. And the declaration to all of the purity of faith. The other was the correction of the Passover. So the Nicea conference was correcting the Passover for our unity's sake. So the Passover was being changed to keep us unified, giving it a single date on a single calendar in a Roman corrupt system of calendaring. And we're not going to use any of the Hebraic calendar to help us know what a Jewish date is for a Jewish holiday. That makes no sense. But that's what we did, under the tutelage of an evil man who in his death proved he was corrupt, and he thought he was God of the Son, as I told you, and Eusebius was the one who got disgusted by him having directed Eusebius, please put my body in the middle of all the 12 apostles' funeral boxes that you've collected. And we have a whole video on that, and it's been recently exposed a couple of years ago by one of the professors out of Germany. And these works of Eusebius were sitting there all along, but nobody was paying attention to him. And he is definitely, Constantine is a very evil, evil man. So just to wrap it up, if we get back to the first slide, we were asking the question, does he fulfill Daniel 7:24 and 25? We saw that he subdued 3 kings. That fulfills Daniel 7:24. And in 7:25, he speaks great words against the Most High. Well, that's where he's basically pushing aside God's word on Passover. I mean, that's and calling it the Jews are the enemies or adversaries of Christians. No, they're not. They're our natural allies, because we just need to convince them of facts about Jesus and his teachings, instead of trying to corrupt the faith like Constantine is doing to make it they would be repulsed by having multiple gods and a Godhead. They could never accept that. Just like Jesus said, the Father is the only true God. Every Jew would have said the Father is the only true God too. So if Jesus was asked his question, ask him, would he have accepted Nicea? Of course not. He said not in John 17:1-3. The Father is the only true God. So he speaks great words against the Most High by creating another God, another person to compete against God, and corrupting Jesus' own words so that he is ignored, that he is not. He said the Father is the only true God. How can you ignore that? It's just so obvious. John 17, 1, 2, 3, if you don't know. And then he wore out the saints who didn't want to change from Nisan 14 to a different date. And Passover was obviously and only, there is no dispute that Passover is the subject matter upon which they changed the date. It's no longer going to be observed. The resurrection of Christ will no longer be observed and remembered on 14th of Nisan, as it had been done with the apostles, with the apostle John having his voice even being heard through Polycarp. No, we're going to disregard even the apostles, even Apostle John. It always has to be anything Constantine tells us to do. We will obey him, and it's going to be a sun-centered date. It's going to be related to the sun in the sense of the spring equinox, a date that is fixed by the activity of the sun. And that's where we all went wrong. We didn't realize, why is he so focused on the sun? Because he thinks he's God of the sun, and we didn't learn about it until he died. And his coin says Divis Constantinus. That means God Constantine, and then he depicts himself as Apollo / Sol Invictus, the god of the sun, taking a chariot ride up to the sun, back to his home existence on the sun. So, and then finally, he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. We've already talked about that, the Quartodeciman controversy and the persecution of them. And he will think to change the times and the laws, and by changing the observance date of 14 Nisan to a different date of Passover, and still call it the word Passover, still applies, and you've changed the date for Passover to be a different date, the Sunday after the spring equinox. That's now the new date, no matter what. And it doesn't matter whether it matches 14 Nisan or not. And that's changing the times and the laws in one action. Just that one action does both simultaneously, as we showed you in the instance of Jeroboam did it, and it was talked about in the same way. All right, God bless everybody. I hope that helps you, and I hope you will really take a look hard at the decision. If you're a Christian and you're following a church that uses the word Easter, tell them, please don't do that anymore. I won't attend, or I won't observe your Easter festival. Tell them it's wrong, and we should then maybe have another discussion with them. We should maybe observe 14 Nisan. Let's find out when that is every year, and let's just have a special Remembrance Day, have a communion service that day. We meet 100 times a year, different times for parties and socials. Why can't we meet one day to remember Jesus that happens to be not exactly the same day of our Roman or Julian calendar? Yeah, okay, so what? It has to be on a Wednesday or a Thursday. Why can't we do that? Is that such a big deal? That's really what is the only argument. It's inconvenient to have to do it on an irregular date. But actually, Easter is itself on an irregular date. It doesn't fall on the same date. It's always moved to a Sunday next to the vernal equinox or the spring equinox. So anyway, I hope that will help us get this issue straightened out and undo the harm that Constantine did to us. All right, God bless. Take care. Ciao. Bye.